Mira wiped the sweat from her forehead as she arranged tomatoes and onions on the creaky wooden stall. Her hands were calloused, her clothes faded but clean. Every coin she earned in that scorching market went toward buying medicine for her ailing mother. The sun showed no mercy, but Mira didn't complain. Struggle had become her language. Near the dusty market gate sat a man she'd seen many times. Blind, they said. A tattered stick rested by his side, dark glasses hiding his eyes. His shirt was torn, his trousers barely held up with a frayed rope. A small, empty bowl lay beside him, untouched by kindness. Children from the neighborhood shouted, cruel names. "Go away, you useless man!" They tossed pebbles his way, laughing. Mira frowned and rushed over. "Stop that!" she snapped, shielding him with her body. The children scattered. The man didn't react. He only bowed his head lower. With a quiet sigh, Mira reached into her basket. She tore off a piece of bread and placed it into his bowl. "It's not much," she whispered, "but it's better than nothing." The man didn't move for a moment. Then, in a voice rough like worn leather, he said, "Thank you." Mira walked back to her stall, pretending not to hear the murmurs around her. "Foolish girl," someone said nearby. "She can't even afford food herself and she's feeding beggars." "She should be saving for her sick mother," another woman scoffed. "That man's a curse." Mira's heart clenched, but she didn't look up. Every day after that, she brought a little something for the blind man, a banana, a crust of yam, a boiled egg. It felt right. Then one afternoon, her aunt arrived. Salma, sharp-tongued, sharp-eyed, and colder than any wind Mira had ever known, walked up to her stall, arms folded. "Why do you always sit near that beggar?" Salma barked. "He's hungry," Mira said quietly. Salma scoffed. "Let him starve. You're busy playing angel while your mother is dying." Mira flinched. Her eyes burned, but she held her voice steady. "He has no one." Her aunt gripped her arm hard. "And soon neither will you. You think kindness will save you? You think bread buys you blessings? Wake up. This world eats girls like you." That night, Mira sat beside her mother's bed. The old woman's breaths were shallow, her body fragile. Mira held her hand gently. "I'll find a way, Mama," she whispered. "I promise." Her mother smiled faintly and said, "You have a beautiful heart. Don't let this world take it." But the world was hungry, and Mira had little left too. Yes, the next morning, Mira awoke before the sun. Her mother had coughed all night. She searched her pouch. Only 3 coins remained. Not enough for medicine. Still, she made her way to the market, her feet aching, her stomach empty. The man was there again, seated in his usual spot. Same dark, glasses, same dusty stick, same silence. She pulled a piece of bread from her basket and approached him. "Good morning," she said, placing the bread in his bowl. But something caught her eye. The way his hand moved. It didn't fumble like it usually did. It reached out smoothly, precisely. His fingers didn't search. They landed directly on the bread. Mira froze. She watched, unsure if what she saw meant anything. "Are you really blind?" she asked, before she could stop herself. The man tilted his head. A small smile formed on his lips. "Does it matter?" She blinked, confused. "I mean, you sit here every day, and people throw things at you." "I just thought—" "You thought what? That all pain must be visible?" he asked, his voice still calm. Before Mira could reply, a voice rang out behind her. "Mira, come here now." It was Aunt Salma. Mira rushed over. Her aunt pulled her aside, lowering her voice. "I've arranged a marriage for you." Mira felt the world spin. "What? With who?" "Chief Kareem," her aunt said, her smile tight. "He's wealthy, respected." Mira shook her head violently. "He's twice my age. No." Salma's expression hardened. "You think you have choices? Your mother is dying. We need the money. He's offering a good bride price." Tears stung Mira's eyes. There has to be another way. Her aunt slapped her hard. There is no other way. You will marry him. End of discussion. Mira turned and ran, pushing through the market crowd, heart pounding. She ran until she reached the river, the only place quiet enough to cry. She fell to her knees and let the tears come. Minutes later, she heard footsteps. She looked up. It was him, the blind man. How did you find me? She asked, wiping her face. I may not see with my eyes, he said, tapping his chest, but I hear more than most. She turned away. He sat beside her. Silence. Then he spoke. Sometimes those closest to us hold the sharpest knives. Mira turned sharply to him, stunned. Who are you? She whispered. He smiled faintly. Just a man watching the world. And in that moment, Mira knew. He was no ordinary beggar. The next morning, Amina awoke with a tight chest and heavy eyes. Her mother coughed throughout the night, her body weaker than ever. The small clay pot where she kept their remaining coins now held only silence. Amina clutched it in her hands and stared at the emptiness. Not even enough for herbs, let alone real medicine. Still, she wrapped her scarf, kissed her mother gently on the forehead, and walked to the market. At the edge of the market, she saw the beggar again, Yasir. Something was different today. As she placed a small piece of flatbread in his bowl, she noticed his hand again. Too precise. It didn't fumble the way blind men usually did. Are you really blind? She asked before she could stop herself. Yasir tilted his head slightly, a faint smile brushing his lips. Does it matter? Amina blinked. The question puzzled her more than an answer might have. Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through. The air. Amina, come here! It was her aunt, Aunt Farida. Amina approached her quickly. Farida pulled her aside and lowered her voice. I've made arrangements. You're to be married. Amina's heart dropped. To whom? Chief Daru, her aunt said with a gleam in her eyes. He's old, yes, but powerful. He will pay handsomely. No, Amina gasped. Farida's smile vanished. Her face hardened. You will do as I say. Your mother is dying, and we have nothing. This is the only way. Tears welled up in Amina's eyes. There has to be another way. Farida slapped her hard across the cheek. There isn't. You're nothing but a burden. At least now you'll be useful. The market blurred through Amina's tears as she ran, past the fruit sellers, the fish stalls, the dry beans and rice, past all the things she could never afford. She ran until her legs gave out beside the river. She sat on the dusty bank, crying silently, shoulders shaking. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Yasir stood nearby, his stick in one hand, quiet as the wind. How did you find me? She whispered. I may not see with my eyes, he said gently, but I hear more than people think. She turned her face away. You shouldn't have followed me. He sat beside her. The silence between them was deep, but not uncomfortable. Then he spoke. Sometimes, the ones closest to us carry the sharpest knives. Amina turned sharply to look at him. His words struck a chord. How did he know? It was as if he had seen into her heart. Who are you? She asked, her voice trembling. He smiled faintly. Just a man watching the world. She didn't believe him, not anymore. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone, not yet knowing her story was about to turn. Amina rushed through the narrow paths of the village, her heart beating like a war drum. Her mother had gotten worse. The small stash of coins she had hidden away for medicine was gone. When she burst into their tiny home, she found her aunt, Ruqayya, standing by the door with folded arms and that same cold smile. Looking for something, girl? Ruqayya asked, tapping her wrapper. Amina's eyes darted to her pouch, which now lay open, empty. You took it, she gasped. Of course I did, Ruqayya snapped. You should be thanking me. That money will finally make you useful. Chief Gambo wants his bride ready, and I won't have him waiting. Amina stumbled backward. You killed her, she whispered. Ruqayya scoffed. Life is cruel, girl. Learn it. That night, Amina sat beside her mother's bed as the last breath left her frail body. She clutched her mother's hand until it went cold. The funeral was small. Few neighbors came. Ruqayya didn't shed a single tear. After the burial, Amina returned to the market. She looked for Yasir, the blind man who wasn't really blind. But he was gone. No one had seen him leave. No trace remained, and yet something inside her whispered that this wasn't the end. Back at home, Amina sat in a dark corner, eyes empty. Ruqayya paced the room, spitting venom. Chief Gambo is coming tomorrow, she snapped. You'll wear what I give you, and you will smile. Understand? Amina didn't respond. I won't sell my dignity, she said quietly. Even if I starve. Ruqayya's eyes flared. What has dignity given you? Nothing but shame and empty bowls. Amina stood slowly, her fists clenched. I'd rather suffer in truth than live in a golden lie. Ruqayya tossed a rusted key into her wrapper. Fine, you can sleep outside when he comes, but you will smile for that man. This house is mine now. The next morning came too quickly. Whispers spread fast. Amina was to be sold to an old chief in exchange for her late mother's debt. At the market, people snickered. She's being sold, one said. Ruqayya's clever, turning death into dowry. Amina kept her eyes down, but her ears burned. Each comment was a stone hurled at her spirit. That night, Ruqayya threw a faded wrapper at her. Tomorrow's the village festival, she said. You'll serve drinks. Let people see what they're getting. Amina said nothing. She picked up the cloth and walked to her mat. Outside, the wind howled softly, like it knew her pain. Then a whisper drifted into the air. Did you hear? The beggar vanished. They say he wasn't blind at all. Amina froze. Yasir. The man she fed. The only one who had looked at her without judgment. Her hands tightened around the wrapper. The village could laugh. Ruqayya could parade her like livestock. But something in her heart said, this story isn't over. Yet. The day of the village festival arrived, faster than Alaya could prepare for it. Before sunrise, Aunt Masira was already yelling, Tie that wrapper tight. You may be poor, but you mustn't look like a stray. Alaya said nothing. She quietly wrapped the faded cloth around herself, each knot feeling like another lock around her soul. The drums in the distance grew louder as the celebration began. The wealthy guests arrived dressed in gold-threaded garments, the elders took their places, and the poor, including Alaya, lined up to serve food and drinks. She carried a tray, weaving through the crowd with downcast eyes. She'd learned by now, silence was safer than pride. Faster, girl, a woman snapped as Alaya passed. She obeyed without a word. But nothing could prepare her for what happened next. As she turned toward the center of the courtyard, something caught her eye. Her breath halted. There, stepping into the festival square, was Kyle, but he wasn't. The beggar, she remembered. No torn shirt, no dusty stick, no dark glasses. He moved with quiet power, dressed in a simple but regal traditional outfit. His eyes were sharp, scanning the crowd with the ease of a man used to being obeyed. Alaya gasped. Her tray slipped from her hands. The cups hit the ground, smashing loudly. Drinks spilled across her feet. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Aunt, Masira's voice cut through the silence like a whip. Stupid girl! What have you done now? But Alaya didn't hear her. Her eyes were locked on Kyle. He turned slowly, as if sensing her gaze. Their eyes met. And in that instant, everything she had buried rose to the surface. The shame, the anger, the helplessness. Kyle didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply smiled. Softly, knowingly. Then he began walking toward her. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. Aunt Masira grabbed Alaya's arm. "Don't embarrass me more than you already have," she hissed. But Alaya couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The man she once fed like a beggar was now walking toward her like a prince. Cale stopped just a few steps away from her. The P. Drums went silent. The crowd held its breath. "Come," he said gently. His voice no longer trembled like before. It was steady, commanding. Aunt Masira tried to pull Alaya back. "She's busy. Find another girl to bother." Kyle's gaze shifted to her aunt, and for the first time, Alaya saw fear flicker in Masira's eyes. "I wasn't asking," Kyle said, his voice still calm but unshakable. Alaya's legs trembled, but she took a step forward, then another. She walked toward him, each step pulling her out of the ashes of humiliation. Cale led her away from the crowd, toward a quiet tree near the edge of the square. The world faded. All that remained was the storm in her heart, and the man who now stood before her, not as a beggar, but as someone who had seen her when no one else had. Under the wide old tree, with the festival noise now muffled behind them, Cale and Alaya stood in silence. Alaya's heart beat so loud she could barely hear her own thoughts. This man, this stranger she once gave bread to, was not just walking, not just seeing, but commanding. Everything about him had changed, or had it always been this way? "You must be wondering who I really am," Kyle said gently. Alaya's throat tightened. She could barely speak, but somehow managed to whisper, "You lied." Cale nodded, not defensive, not arrogant, just calm. "I did," he admitted, "but not to deceive you. I needed to know something." Tears welled up in Alaya's eyes, not from betrayal, but from all the days she'd felt so alone, so mocked, so humiliated. "Why?" she asked. "Why sit in the dirt? Why let people spit on you, laugh at you? Why pretend to be blind?" Kyle looked into the distance for a moment. His eyes weren't cold. They were full of something else. Memories, wounds, loss. "Because I needed to know if kindness still existed," he said. "I had everything once, wealth, power, a family, even love. But when it all fell apart, when I was left with nothing, I realized that those who smiled at me only did so because of what I had." He turned to face her fully. "Then I met you." Alaya gasped softly. "You gave me bread when you had nothing. You defended me when it brought you shame. You didn't know who I was, but you were kind anyway. That is why you're standing here now." Alaya's knees felt weak. She remembered every moment, the bread, the scolding from her aunt, the laughter of strangers. She had been mocked for caring, and yet that small kindness had changed everything. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," she whispered. "I know," Kyle said, stepping closer. "That's what made it real." Before she could respond, a voice from the festival called out, "Kyle, the elders are waiting." Kyle turned to the sound and then back to Alaya. "Stay close," he said with a soft smile. "You'll want to hear what comes next." He walked away, his presence rippling through the crowd like a quiet storm. The whispers began again, this time filled with awe and confusion. And Alaya? She stood frozen beneath the tree, half in fear, half in hope. The man she once thought was blind had just opened her eyes to something bigger than fate. By the time Cale reached the center of the festival grounds, a hushed wave had fallen over the crowd. The elders sat tall in their chairs, their robes pressed, eyes curious. Rich guests adjusted their golden wrappers, whispering to each other. "Who is he? Where did he come from?" "He looks familiar." Alaya stood at the edge, her hands trembling, her heart crashing in her chest like a drum. Her aunt, Madame Soraya, glared from across the courtyard, her lips drawn tight, knuckles white as she clenched her shawl. Then Kyle raised one hand. The music stopped. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kyle's voice rang out, not loud but strong enough to silence. Whispers. "You all saw me," he began, "sitting at the market gate, blind, dusty, weak." Gasps echoed. Faces turned pale. Some remembered throwing stones. Others remembered laughing. "And most of you," Cale continued, his eyes moving slowly, over the crowd, looked away. He paused. His gaze landed gently on one figure, but one person didn't. Heads turned. All eyes now fell on Alaya. Alaya's knees nearly buckled, but she stood tall. She would not bow, not this time. This woman, Kyle said with quiet pride, shared her food when she barely had any. She defended me while others mocked her. She showed kindness, not for reward, but because it was right. Silence, deep and reverent. Even Madame Soraya looked shaken. Kyle turned to the elders. "I returned today not as a beggar," he said, "but as a man of means, and I choose to honor true wealth, the kind that cannot be bought or sold." Some villagers clapped awkwardly. Others looked at the ground in shame. But Kyle didn't smile. He wasn't here for applause. He walked through the crowd, each step deliberate, until he stood in front of Alaya. She looked at him, stunned. "I owe you more than words," he said, so softly only she could hear. "But today, I give you back what they tried to take. Your dignity." Her breath caught in her throat. Kyle extended his hand. For a moment, Alaya hesitated. But then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. Not as a servant, not as a beggar, but as an equal. Behind them, Madame Soraya collapsed onto a wooden bench, her face drained of color. No one helped her up. And Alaya? For the first time in her life, she didn't look down. She looked forward, because the festival wasn't the only thing that had changed. So had she. The festival ended, but the whispers did not. By morning, the entire village had a new story. The blind beggar was a king in disguise. And that poor girl, Alaya, she's walking beside him now. No one saw that coming. Alaya walked through the market streets that once stung her with laughter and cruel gossip. Now those same mouths stood silent. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away in shame. But she didn't need their approval anymore. She walked tall, not because Cale held her hand, but because no one could hold her down. But Madame Soraya wasn't done. When Alaya returned to the small house, she found her clothes, her few belongings, tossed into the dirt outside. Madame Soraya stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes burning with jealousy and rage. "You think you're better than me now?" she spat. "Because a man said your name in public? Because you touched the hand of a guest?" Alaya stood quietly. She didn't need to fight. "You walk like a queen," Soraya sneered. "But remember this. Men like him leave girls like you. They use you, then toss you away. And when that happens, don't crawl back here. This roof is no longer yours." Alaya's voice was calm, even as her chest ached. "I don't belong to you anymore." Soraya's bitter laughter followed her down the road. "You'll be back. You have nothing. No gold, no name, no home." But Alaya didn't flinch. With nothing but a cloth-wrapped bundle and the wind on her face, she walked into the unknown, and for the first time it felt like freedom. That afternoon, as the sun dipped gently over the hills, a young boy ran up the path. His feet were dusty, and he was panting. "Miss, Kyle wants to see you. He's at the old town hall. He said to come quickly." Alaya blinked in surprise. "The town hall?" The boy nodded, then took off again. She followed. At the old community hall, once used for storing grain, she found Cale standing beside a long wooden table covered in papers. His expression softened when he saw her. "You came," he said. Alaya stepped closer. "I didn't know where else to go." He smiled. Then you came to the right place. She looked at the documents, puzzled. What is all this? I'm starting a foundation, Cale replied. For women like you, girls who were told they're nothing, girls forced into silence, into marriage, into survival. Alaya's heart skipped. Why tell me? Kyle looked into her eyes. Because I don't want to give charity. I want to build something real, with someone who understands pain, sacrifice, and dignity. She swallowed. How do I know this? Isn't another test? Cale placed a hand gently over hers. Because this time, I'm not hiding. And neither should you. Months passed, and in that time, Alaya's world transformed. She was no longer the orphan girl serving drinks at festivals. She was no longer Madame Soraya's burden or the poor daughter of a sick mother forgotten by the world. She was now Director Alaya, a woman who helped lead the very foundation that gave others the strength she once fought for alone. Kyle didn't just keep his word. He let her shape the vision. The foundation trained young women to read, to write, to stitch, to start small businesses, to dream again. Every week, girls from nearby villages came to learn, and every time Alaya stood before them, she spoke not as a savior, but as a survivor. She told them, "You are not your suffering. You are not your scars. You are seeds, and seeds were meant to grow." The same villagers who once laughed at her now stepped aside when she passed. Some still whispered, some were jealous, but many watched in quiet respect. Even Madame Soraya, who once threw her clothes into the dirt, could only watch from a distance as Alaya walked through the market with her head high. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant hills and the sounds of laughter echoed from the training center, Cale stood beside her beneath the wide tree outside. They watched the girls practice their crafts. Some stitched colorful fabrics. Others read aloud to one another. One was even building a small cart for her family's fruit business. Kyle broke the silence. "Do you remember the first time you brought me bread?" Alaya smiled gently. "I didn't even know if you could see me." "I could," he said. "Not with my eyes. But I saw you." She looked at him. "Why did you choose to do all this?" "I came searching for kindness," Cale replied. "But instead, I found you." Alaya turned, her heart steady this time. "And who do you see?" "Now?" Cale stepped forward slowly. "My equal." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple hand-woven ring. No gold, no diamonds, just threads bound by meaning. "I don't offer you riches, Alaya," he said softly. "I offer you partnership, in life, in purpose, in everything that matters." Tears welled in Alaya's eyes, but they weren't born from pain. Not anymore. She nodded slowly. "Yes, not because I need saving, but because I choose you." And beneath that wide tree where once she had cried in silence, Alaya chose her future, with the same courage she once used to feed a beggar with nothing but bread and hope. Weeks later, under the ancient tree in the heart of the village, people gathered again. But this time, it was not for a festival. It was for a union. Alaya and Kyle stood side by side, hand in hand. The villagers who once sneered at her now wore awe on their faces. They whispered among themselves, "Isn't she the girl Soraya tried to sell? She's marrying him? The same man who was a blind beggar? He was never blind. He was testing us all." Kyle wore simple yet elegant traditional robes. Alaya, in a dress woven by the very women she helped empower, radiated strength, not from jewels, but from everything she had endured and overcome. The elders spoke blessings, children danced, drums played a rhythm of honor and restoration. When the final prayer was spoken, Kyle turned to Alaya, holding her hands gently. "You once asked me why I pretended to be blind," he said. She smiled softly. "And you once told me, not everything that shines is meant to be touched." He nodded. But you were never meant to be touched by darkness. Only seen, only lifted. Alaya leaned in, her voice playful, filled with calm joy. You tricked the whole village, pretending not to see. But now I see clearly, Kale chuckled. And I finally see what real wealth is. Not gold, not power, not even freedom, but dignity. And a partner who guards it. They sealed their vows under the old tree, watched by those who once ignored, doubted, and ridiculed. But none of that mattered now. They walked forward as equals, as builders, as people who knew that kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest thing a soul can carry through fire. The villagers would never forget Alaya, the girl who gave bread to a beggar while starving herself, was now the woman helping dozens rise from the very dust that once buried her. And Kyle, the stranger who tested hearts with rags and silence, was now the man standing by her side, not as a prince in shining clothes, but as a man who understood pain, purpose, and love earned the hard way.